Hey everybody, it's Nicole Byer here with some hot takes from Wayfair. A cozy corduroy sectional from Wayfair? Yeah, that's a hot take. Go on and add it to your cart and take it. A pink glam nightstand from Wayfair? Scalding hot take. Take it before I do. A mid-century modern cabinet from Wayfair that doubles as a wine bar? Do I have to say it? It's a hot take. Get it at wayfair.com and enjoy that free shipping too.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
Hey, warm from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by one of our good friends, Riley Frain. He does such great work at both the Portal Report along with Mid-Major Madness. We just did the NEC conference preview on this podcast about 48 or so hours ago. I know that he is based out there in the great state of New York, so we're going to be addressing that conference a little bit. We're going to be taking a look at the Atlantic 10 as well. I know that he does a great job on that front as well. Some of these teams have been able to do a great job of just being able to utilize resources at the mid-major level to be able to attract talent. We're going to talk a lot about how a lot of these guys that are ranked like 200th, 250th in terms of the recruiting rankings are now going to mid-major schools rather than going to high major schools because they might get buried on the bench at a higher major school, and at the mid-major level they're going to be able to get a little bit more immediate playing time to be able to one day transfer up and be able to get the bag at a bigger school. So we're going to be addressing that and so much more. Going to have a great chat with Riley, and if you ever do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, the email does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And while I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever they want. 100% of gambling transactions do get approved by EdgeBoost, and when you go to EdgeBoost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That's going to get you a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. And now how about if we do dive in with Riley, who's doing such a great job all 12 months out of the year, taking a look at the sport of college basketball. He's doing an amazing job getting set for what is going to be an incredible season, and you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at his first and last name, Riley Frain. That last name is spelled F-R-A-I-N. And Riley, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Greg. My pleasure, man. Always great to be here with you chatting some basketball. Season gets closer and closer every time we talk, and it feels like it's going to start creeping up on us here soon. So always a pleasure, man. Happy to chat with you today.
Always happy to have you aboard, and I just recently did my NEC conference preview edition, as we've got a lot of conference previews that are going to be going down on this podcast the last few weeks, and I know you do a great job of covering the NEC at a few different outlets as well. And how do you take a look at this conference? Because I do feel like it's sort of LIU and everyone else. Obviously, it's been a little bit gutted by so many teams leaving for the Metro Atlantic, as that's just been a byproduct of what we've seen in conference realignment. But how do you take a look at an NEC where we're probably going to have a lot of teams outside the top 250 in KenPom, but I feel like LIU, a team that you live pretty close by, I feel like they're a team that could really be able to bust out and have themselves a nice season.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick against them with all the returning talent they have. You think of a guy like Jamal Fuller, Malachi Davis, who they're returning as well. I mean, 2 all-conference caliber guys. I mean, you have to pick LIU at the top of the conference coming in. I think it would be really hard to pick against them currently. But that being said, a number of teams who are going to return some really exciting lineups here, which is interesting for a conference like the NEC, where where you expect them to maybe lose a bunch of talent, to some of the bigger conferences in the program. I certainly think, LIU is the standout and to keep some guys, like Davis and like Fuller, as I just mentioned. But even a team like, Wagner's going to be able to, they bought in some guys in the transfer portal as well as were able to retain a little bit of talent. I think of Stonehill, who was able to retain close to 50% of their minutes, I believe, or it's about 45% of their minutes, according to Bart Tvorovic. A team like Central Connecticut, who's just always really consistent in the conference, and under a head coach like Coach Sellers, and obviously coming off a regular season, what they were able to do. I know they lose a guy like Devin Hayes in the transfer portal. Overall, what they were able to do this offseason, a really exciting team. I kind of look at that maybe as the top four. If you want to throw a top five team in there, I look at maybe a Lemoyne. Fairleigh Dickinson has always been really competitive under Coach Jack Castleberry. Even Mercyhurst was really solid in year one last year. So I think it's kind of an interesting conference because you have a lot of newcomers to Division I, but you have some really competitive programs like an LIU, like Wagner, like even Chicago State, who recently joined. And I know they sort of tend to be looked down upon as maybe the lower tier of college basketball, but a program that's had some really solid competitive seasons and has always recruited some interesting talent being in the Chicago area. So I think it'll be a really exciting year for the the NEC. I think it's obviously kind of a little top heavy, as you mentioned, with a team like LIU at the top returning so much talent, but I'm excited to see how it plays out as always. I think it's a conference that's always really competitive, and obviously it kind of comes down to the conference tournament, which is fun. But yeah, I think right now just LIU is a big leader here, this far out from the season.
And I am doing a lot of conference previews right now, and most of these are mid-major teams. And just how big do you think that it is, the chemistry aspect of things? Because we just mentioned it with LIU. It feels like they've got more returning in the NEC than any other team. I'm not sure if this podcast is going to be out before or after my SoCon conference preview, but I look at Furman as very clearly being the top team in that conference because so many teams like Chattanooga are going to be new look. UNC Greensboro, while Furman, they return so much. And while we make a ton out of the transfer portal, and very rightfully so, a lot of teams can have their fortunes changed by the transfer portal. I do think that in this day and age, being able to return 50+% of your minutes, especially for your mid-major, really does you a lot of good, and allows for some of these teams that maybe were towards the bottom of the conference last year, like I'm looking at a Western Carolina in the SoCon, and them being able to make a leap up just with that returning chemistry and perhaps a nice bust out in year number 2.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it feels like every coach I've spoken to this offseason says something very similar to what you just said, Greg, in how important it is, particularly at that mid-major, low-major level, however you want to label it, how important it is having a couple guys back and sort of having a core back to build off of when it feels like every other offseason, these low-major, mid-major programs are practically rebuilding a roster from scratch. To have 4 or 5 guys, down the roster who have been there before, who have sort of understood what you want to do as a coach, what you're looking for, as a coach, what your program is all about. I think being able to have guys to sort of set the tone in that way is huge for a lot of these coaches, particularly teams that are winning. I recently spoke to stick to the East Coast a little bit, but the Atlantic Sun I'm previewing, and I recently spoke to Coach Ujol over at North Alabama, and obviously coming off a co-regular season championship in the A-Sun, and they're able to keep 4 or 5 guys from last season's roster who all played pretty consistent, solid minutes, and not necessarily a guy like a Tay Fields who was a starter there last year, but guys who are averaging 8.5 points per game, 5.5 points per game, and are all going to be expected to take a step up this year, and just how important having even a small core like that is for a team like North Alabama, as they look to kind of defend the conference crown here. Having a couple guys back, like you mentioned, Greg, helps to build that chemistry, but also helps to sort of set the tone, the understanding for what this program is. When you have so many new guys kind of coming in and out every offseason, being able to retain a little bit of talent and, let that talent sort of be the baseline for your program is a great way to sort of build a winning culture. I think in this era of the transfer portal where you're going to lose a handful of guys every offseason.
Yep, no question about it. I do think that it is so important for these teams, and I do think that just chemistry is going to be a little bit more magnified moving forward, especially with the fact that it does feel like the mid-major landscape is changing a little bit as well, as Riley Frain, who does such great work over at the Portal Report, and Mid-Major Madness is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I'm not sure if you noticed this, but it did feel like more of those like fringe top 200, top 250 recruits did decide to go a little bit more to the mid-major route with everything that we're seeing in college basketball right now, because we do have a lot of these teams that are at the power conference level wanting some experience. They're going out there, they're going in the transfer portal and plucking these guys. And while the power conference teams are still going to get your top 25, top 50 guys, like the Boozer brothers were not going to be going down and playing in the NEC or something like that. Yeah. Sorry to the NEC, but you're probably not going to be landing the Bruiser brothers. That said, the Atlantic 10, it felt like got a lot of guys in like the top 150, top 200 decide to go there, albeit mostly guys that were right around about 100, though VCU, I know, got a top 75 recruit of their own, and I feel like that's a little bit of a changing dynamic in college basketball right now. These guys that are ranked like 100, 125, 150, deciding to go to the mid-major route and electing for minutes rather than riding the bench at a Power 5 school.
Yeah, no, of course. No disrespect to the NEC. We love the NEC, but I mean,
Bruiser brothers might be a little bit ambitious.
Yes, just a little bit, Greg. But you hit the nail on the head. I think with the nature of the transfer portal and everything, we've seen all the developments surrounding it. I think it sort of goes both ways. Maybe I don't know if you sort of feel it stems more from the player side, but I think for a lot of these high major programs, they're not super interested in recruiting a lot of these top 100 guys, maybe because you can go in the portal and get a veteran who's a little bit older, a little bit more mature, who's been playing college basketball for a while, who's more experienced, and you can sort of build your lineup that way. And it sort of tends to programs sort of having to rebuild every other offseason, and particularly at the high major level when you're looking to poach guys, they're not going to have a ton of eligibility, so it's tough to get guys who stand around for multiple years. And on top of that, even if they have multiple years, you get guys who are transferring every other offseason. But I think that works to the advantage of some of these mid-major programs like an A10 or like a school in the American Conference. Since these power conference aren't sort of lurking with those guys, you mentioned it maybe from like in the high school rankings from like 75 to 150, 200. High major schools aren't really looking at those guys anymore, just with all the development we've seen around the transfer portal. So yeah, it feels like a major advantage for some of these mid-major schools. They're able to recruit. We've seen it start to flourish this offseason. And on top of that, I mean, you're even seeing that in the transfer portal. Some former top 100 guys who maybe weren't getting the minutes they wanted at a high major program, or sort of taking a step down to a conference like the A10, and even nowadays conferences, sort of been a little bit lower down the totem pole than that, so to speak, for lack of, a better way to put it. The transfer portal is always going to take it and give it away, but, I think in terms of high school recruiting and maybe being able to take some guys down from the high major level as well, who were once highly touted high school recruits and didn't quite get the playing time they have. I think there's, a lot of ways for mid-major schools to be successful in recruiting, whether it be with the transfer portal, whether it be with looking at some of these potentially top 100 prospects who high major schools are missing out on just because they're looking for more experienced guys.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that that's such an interesting dynamic in this day and age in college basketball. And we just did talk about the Atlantic 10 a little bit there, because it does feel like out of all of the mid-major conferences, they were able to do the best job in terms of landing some of these freshmen in. I do want to talk a little bit more about the Atlantic 10 landscape on the flip side, talk about how they've been able to land some of these freshmen and just how some of these mid-tier teams might be able to rise up this year. Is there a team or two out there in the Atlantic 10 that might be a little bit of a sleeper, a team that might be able to go from the bottom half of the conference up to the top half of the conference? We're going to be talking about that with Riley and so much more on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast and Family Podcast.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along. Which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. That's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
And we're back in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Beast and Family Podcast. Back rejoined by Riley Frain, who does such great work over at the Portal Report. Take a look at this amazing game that we all know and love of college basketball. I know that he is very hard at work getting set for what is going to be an amazing college basketball season. Mid-Major Madness is also a place where he's doing some great work, and we're going to be talking a lot about the Atlantic 10 year on this part of the conversation with him. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at his first name, Riley Frain. Last name is spelled Frain, and we left off last segment talking about these freshmen that are going going to be going to these mid-major teams that are a little bit more highly ranked than what we've seen before. And I feel like the Atlantic 10 have really been the best conference in terms of landing a lot of these like top 150, top 200 freshmen over the last 18 or so months. How do you take a look at the landscape this year? Because a lot of people have penciled in VCU as their number one team, and very rightfully so. And they do bring in Nick Lewis, spelled N-Y-K Lewis, who I think is going to be rock solid for them right away. But I just look at this conference outside of VCU, and it feels like this is once again going to be one of those conferences where they might be able to get two teams in the NCAA tournament, but it feels like they're once again going to be loaded with teams that are going to be right around that top 75, top 80 range. Duquesne, George Mason, Loyola Chicago, St. Louis, George Washington. Dayton is a little bit of a question mark right now, but they've got a lot of solid teams. Then that one team that it feels like is above the rest in VCU. But as we know, there's a lot of volatility and a lot of chaos in this conference, which I honestly feel like has hurt them from getting more bids into the NCAA tournament the last few years.
I won't touch on all the freshmen around the conference, but, just a lot of exciting names mentioned. I mean, you touched on VCU there, and then bringing in Nick Lewis, another guy, Jordan Tillery, who they'll add as well. And just on top of a really exciting transfer class there, I certainly think they have the roster to be the favorite this year. The big question mark for me is a brand new coach who's sort of going to have to get acclimated to the league, although a really talented one. Pretty much a whole new roster compared to last year, obviously, because they're bringing in a new coach. So I think VCU is going to be a team that, is going to be in that top 3, top 4 this year. But, how quickly can they get this team to gel? How quickly can they get this team on the same page? How quickly can they get this team firing under a new head coach? Some question marks to answer. And, I think any staff would say that in the country when you have a brand new head coach and, pretty much a whole new roster. There's sort of, there's a transition period. There's the learning curve. But tough to pick against that VCU team. I look at a St. Louis who's returning a ton of talent and has a 4-star freshman coming in Jax Kerr, and I think they could be really competitive just bringing back a guy like a Robbie Avila, of course, who feels like one of the most veteran players in college basketball, of course, but, he now has a better understanding of the league. He's going to be hopefully 100% healthy this year, and he could be a guy, who's, of course, in that player of the year conversation come the end of the year. Everyone expected him to be last year, but obviously kind of battled some injuries, as I mentioned, and whatnot, and St. Louis struggled with injuries, different stints throughout the year, but that forced them to play some of their young guys last year. And, I look up and down the roster, some of the guys they'll return, like Kellen Thames, who's going to be a redshirt junior this year, Amari McCottery, who's now going to be a sophomore. Of course, Kalua Anya's back, and he'll be a senior this year. Even a guy like Dylan Warlick, who had to play some improved minutes as a sophomore. And, just the amount of talent that St. Louis team brings back, I think bodes really well for them. I look at another team like George Washington, who maybe similar to VCU did a ton in the transfer portal, but on the inverse is not going to be as youthful, only has, I believe, maybe one recruit coming in and, a solid 3-star, Jalen Rowan, maybe from the local DC area, so a local guy and a 3-star still. But, they're going to be this George Washington team a little bit more reliant on a couple returners, a guy like Trey Moss, and it seems like hopefully Garrett Johnson will be healthy this year. But then on top of that, it's going to be a lot of transfer portal talent, like Boo Boo Benjamin, like Tyrone Marshall. They'll have Rafael Castro back as well, and I think he could be in that all-conference first-team conversation this year for sure. And that's why I think George Washington is going to be a team who they've sort of steadily improved under Caputo, but I think this will be a year where you could really see them take a jump into that top 4, top 5 conversation. And just looking at some of the rest of the teams, I mean, I think, Dayton is, of course, always very solid and going to be in that conversion. I think Loyola Chicago made some good moves this offseason, and, you'll see hopefully them 100% Justin Moore they're bringing in, and hopefully he's healthy this season, bringing in a couple guys from the transfer portal who are going to be impactful. I look at St. Joe's, too, who's going to return some solid talent and was able to bring in a few guys from the transfer portal. I don't think they'll be, in that top 5 mix, but I like some of the pieces they were able to add, and I think maybe that's sort of your top 6, and maybe the last team I'd add into that conversation at the current moment is probably George Mason, just with everything they were able to do in the transfer portal this offseason. Talking about my work at the Portal Report, they were our highest-ranking 8-10 team in terms of their offseason transfer portal acquisitions, bringing in guys like Dola Adebayo from Mount St. Mary's or Jeremiah Hill and a handful of other guys, and just a really talented team from the transfer portal. But I think similar to VCU, they're going to have a lot of questions in terms of how quickly can they gel. I really like what Tony Skinn's been able to do there at George Mason. He'll have them really competitive, and they'll definitely be in that top 5 sort of conversation as well. If he can get them firing pretty quickly. Those are sort of maybe the top 6. I think I mentioned 7 teams that I kind of like and I think could be, decently competitive this year. But it's a conference that's wide open. A lot of youthful talent coming in. We kind of touched on, how it's a conference that maybe has stole some top 100 prospects. A lot of new storylines, new head coaches, a lot of new rosters coming in with the transfer portal. But yeah, I would say maybe that's sort of the top 7 at the moment that's really stood out to me.
Yep, and it's going to be a really interesting conference because there's always 1 or 2 teams that are unexpected that make a rise as well. I think that Duquesne could be that team this year as well. And I want to end it with this because I am doing a lot of conference previews, and it's always an interesting debate as to whether or not a team can go from worst to first, which is obviously a big ask in college basketball. And I don't know if we're going to get a team that goes from worst to first, so I'm not going to go that far. But who's a team that maybe finished towards the bottom half of their conference, a team that was below 500 within their conference that you think could really rise up this year and surprise a lot of people that is maybe hiding under the radar? And this could be in any conference. I know that we've talked a lot about these Northeast teams, and we've talked a lot about the mid-majors out there, but this could be any conference, any team. Is there a team that you look at that maybe was towards the bottom half of their conference last year that you think could take a nice jump this year?
Yeah, sure. I'll touch on Duquesne quick. I don't know that they were quite bottom half of the conference. I think they finished 9th, maybe
right
10th,
around 500, yeah.
Yeah, right around that bottom half, but close to the top tier of it. And I could see them taking a little bit of a jump this year, obviously returning a handful of guys, which is big. I think according to our Torvik's rankings, they maybe return the most talent in the conference, about 60% of their minutes, it looks like. So yeah, that's going to lead the conference this season. And on top of that, bringing in a handful of guys who can really score it from the transfer portal. I think of Terrence Ginneyard. I think of Jimmy Williams coming over from South Florida, who I think, this will be a really good level for him in the A-10 with a program like Duquesne where he could be a really impactful guy. I like what Duquesne was able to do this offseason. We talked about how important it is being able to maintain guys this year and being able to maintain guys in this era of the transfer portal. They were able to do that this offseason and got off to a bit of a rocky start under a new coach last year. I like what they were able to add in addition to the guys they were able to retain. I think, Drew Joyce, he should have them taking a step up this year. And, I think they should be a little bit more competitive than they were to start the year last year. I could see them getting more than, I think they finished 13-19 last year. So, I see them getting a couple more wins than that just with all the talent they've returned. Now, a team I think that could maybe take a bit of a step up this year, I'm looking at the bottom half of the conference, and I think Fordham, but I don't know that I see them taking a huge step up. I just think they're going to be improved in year one under Mike Magpayo. I like a lot of the guys he was able to bring in, maybe not super high name guys outside of a DeJour Reeves, who obviously was an incredible scorer at Iona, and Zyreek Nutter, who was a really solid contributor at Georgia State as well, but just a really analytical coach who I think is building this program in the right direction. And so I think they finished dead last in the conference last year, 3-15 in A-10 play, and I don't think they'll finish bottom of the conference this year. I think they'll be a little bit more competitive than they've been in the past couple of years, and hopefully they get back to that Fordham defensive tough tenacity, but they also have some guys who can score, and I think that'll make for an interesting roster this year. But I think that the team, when I look at this conference, who I see making probably the biggest jump, it has to be Richmond, just based off what they were able to do last year under Mooney, and just really, really struggled. I know he battled some health issues and maybe had to step away for a while, and that sort of cost them some time. But, everything they were able to do this offseason, on top of the guys they were able to return, looking at this roster, I really like Jonathan Beagle, who came over from UAlbany last year and ended up being a decent role player for them. I think he's got to take a bit of a step up this year. I look at a guy like Michael Walls, who they recruited, has been there for 4 years, and he really needs to be a go-to guy this year. I look at maybe a guy like Apostolos Romalogu, who came over from UConn last offseason and ended up being like a 6.5 point per game guy and is a really efficient rebounder. I think they're going to rely on him to sort of step up this year. And then they bring in a couple guys from the transfer portal that I think really interest me when I look at this Richmond rotation. Guys like AJ Lopez, who's a really good defensive player during his time at Maine. Jaden Daughtry, who of course was with Indiana State this past season and had some good tournament experience there. A guy like Will Johnston, who was a phenomenal scorer during his time at Loyola Marymount. I expect him to be a really solid scorer there. A guy who shoots 40% from 3-point range, close to it. And then they'll bring in a guy like David Thomas from DePaul. Getting a high major talent is never a bad thing, but on top of that, coming down from DePaul, who has some high major experience, if I'm not mistaken, he began his career in the conference with Davidson as well. So has a little experience points in the A10. And I like sort of those additions. And I think on top of the guys who you're expecting to take a step up, I think Richmond sort of has to be the pick to make a bit of a jump this year, just based on 5 wins in conference last year. They're a team that's pretty consistently competitive under Chris Mooney. Feels like they're never the best team, but they maybe always sneak in and grab the tournament bid late in the season. And it feels like just a team that finished, tied for second to last in conference last year. They're a year older. They made some good additions in the portal. So a team I see probably finishing closer to mid-table, if not maybe competing for that 7th or 8th spot in conference.
Yep, I think that they will be very competitive. There's a lot of teams I think are going to be so interesting out there. And I know you, Riley, are doing a great job of covering them all. You do a tremendous job over at the Portal Report. Transfer portal is relatively done, so now I know that your main work is over at Mid-Major Madness. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just first off, you can check me out on Twitter at Riley Frain. That's at RILEYFRAIN. Just always promoting my college basketball related coverage there. As Greg mentioned, I do a lot of work for Mid-Major Madness. Of course, a lot of sort of Northeast, East Coast focused mid-major coverage. We're, ramping up for the season over there, getting our preseason previews ready over there. And of course, just a lot of other fun college basketball off-season related content at the moment. So come check us out there. And then I do a lot of other work for an outlet called the Portal Report, where we obviously do a ton of transfer portal related coverage. And Greg mentioned it as well. Transfer portal definitely starting to slow down, but we still have lots of content going over there throughout the off-season, whether it be written stories on guys growing in the transfer portal, or we do work with Seth Davis to sort of just provide coverage in the transfer portal in general. So you can come check any of that out on my Twitter. I have lots of coverage over there. And, as I mentioned, we're going to start ramping up with the season getting here pretty close.
Yep, and Riley, he's doing such an amazing job all 12 months out of the year, taking a look at this great sport of college basketball. So big thanks to Riley for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I am indeed with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. Expect a lot more conference previews coming in the next few weeks. Well, it's great to be able to get you a pair of them over the last 72 hours, and we're going to continue that momentum rolling on as we look to get you guys set for what is going to be the best college basketball season ever. So I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Nicole Byer here with some hot takes from Wayfair. A cozy corduroy sectional from Wayfair? Yeah, that's a hot take. Go on and add it to your cart and take it. A pink glam nightstand from Wayfair? Scalding hot take. Take it before I do. A mid-century modern cabinet from Wayfair that doubles as a wine bar? Do I have to say it? It's a hot take. Get it at wayfair.com and enjoy that free shipping too.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.